So yes, I've been asked to come and talk to you about behaviour change. So my name is Natasha Parker, and my job is that I work as head of our post-consumerism movement at an environmental charity called Global Action Plan. And our vision of what we want to achieve is a green and thriving planet where people enjoy their lives within the Earth's resources. And our mission is to do this by inspiring change, by making the connections between what's good for us as human beings and what's good for the planet. And we use a lot of behaviour change theory behind a lot of the work that we do to help people make those changes in their lives. So when we're talking about behaviour change, what are we actually talking about? So this might sound obvious, but it's always good to just define what we're actually talking about. So essentially, we're talking about behaviour change when we want to try and influence people to start something, or to stop something, or to do something differently. And sometimes it's quite good to just remind ourselves in those very simple terms of what we're trying to do. And why do we need to have kind of behaviour change theory behind what we do? Why can't we just, tell people this is the right thing to do and this is what we want you to start doing and want you to stop doing? Because us humans, we're not very rational and we don't make very rational choices. So I don't know, this picture gets used quite often, but you might have seen it before, but of people getting the escalator up to the fitness centre instead of using the steps. We do really stupid things as human beings, and we don't always make rational choices that make sense. And we often do the easy thing rather than the right thing. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some examples from our work, and then talk you through the theory, so from the behaviour change literature, to give you that kind of background. So first of all, just a kind of overview. So just when you're thinking about behaviour change, if you're wanting to implement something in your local area, the first question, and again, it sounds really obvious, but it's really important to start from what behaviour do you actually want to change? And the process that we would go through to do this would be to actually identify a whole range of different behaviours that you might want to change. So write them all down and go, right, these are all different things we might want to do. And then think about it in terms of what's actually going to have, which of these behaviours is actually going to have the biggest impact. So environmentally, you might be choosing between, do we want to be encouraging people to reduce their food waste, or do we want to be encouraging people to, switch their light bulbs off? And you might be thinking, well, which of those has the bigger impact environmentally? So you might want to choose the food waste because that has a bigger impact environmentally. But also think about what are people likely to do. So some of the things that do have the biggest impact, for example, stopping eating meat or stopping having not having a car anymore. We know that a lot of people are just unlikely to do those. So it depends on what you feel is going to have the biggest impact, that you feel that people might be ready for change to do as well and likely to do. And not that we shouldn't try and do those difficult things, we absolutely should. And there's lots of people, where there are ways of trying to make those things more palatable to people. But if you're starting from scratch, you might want to think about, well, how can we start with getting people changing in something that we think they're likely to do? And just being really specific. So, for example, rather than thinking, right, I want to help people save energy in their homes, you want to be more specific than that. So you might want to be breaking it down to, we want to be encouraging people to switch off lights when they're not in use, insulate their homes better, turning their thermostats down 1 degree, doing their washing at 30 degrees instead of on a hot wash, and break it down to those really specific actions, so that people are really, really clear about what it is you're trying to influence them to do. And then finally, obviously, if you're doing something locally that you want to influence a change in your local communities, you want to be able to measure it. So you need to take some kind of baseline. How are you going to know if what you've done has made a difference? What can you measure to start with before you start, to get a baseline, and what can you measure later on to help you see that you've made that change. So really thinking about knowing where you're starting from, and knowing kind of how you'll know when you've made that change. So the next thing you want to do when you've really chosen your behaviour and you're really clear about what it is you're trying to influence is understanding what are the barriers and enablers to people doing that behaviour. So who is doing it, who's not doing it, so identifying who are you trying to influence, who are the people who are not doing it, and talking to them. So we do countless focus groups with people, to asking them, just talking to them about, why they do things, why they don't do them, what gets in the way, what would help them, and what would motivate them. So what would make it important enough for them to do it? And it's really, really important to get this sense of what's stopping people from doing those behaviours in the first place. And just talking to people don't always know why they do what they do or why they don't know what they do, but it's the best we've got is to go and talk to them and try and understand what's getting in the way. So an example of this, so at Global Action Plan, for a number of years, we ran a kind of hospital energy saving program where we were trying to influence nurses to do things to save energy in their hospitals. And it was called Operation TLC, T for turning off equipment when it was not in use, L for lights off, so turning off lights when they're not being used, and controlling the heating. And so we spoke to nurses and we found out what would actually motivate them to do these things, because it's really important to understand that. And we found that, their absolute number one motivation was people, was their patients. So they wanted to know, well, how will this make life better for our patients? So we designed our messaging around showing how, having lights out and using more natural light than artificial light could be really beneficial for patients' recovery, how controlling the heating to make sure hospitals weren't too hot and could help patients sleep better. So really kind of tapping into what's important to them. And then their second motivator was planet. So they were like, yeah, we are motivated by, making sure we're doing the right thing for the planet. And then finally, way lower down their list was pocket, was money. So obviously saving energy in hospitals is going to save money as well. And that might motivate the management of the hospital in saving money, but it doesn't motivate the nurses on the front line. So it's really understanding about the people that you're trying to influence and what's really important to them. And then we spoke to them about the barriers, things that were getting in the way of them doing these actions. And one was around kind of permission. So they were like, oh, I don't, there's equipment that I just don't know if I'm allowed to turn that off. It's just there and it's on, so I don't dare turn it off. Just not seeing others doing it. So not thinking it's normal to turn the lights off when you go out, or to control the heating because no one else is doing it. And the barrier of technology as well. So just they were like, well, we don't know how to control the heating. We don't know where the controls are. So these really simple just things that are getting in the way. So what we put in place to help them was just really clear signage of, on machinery saying, please switch me off when you leave the room. So they knew what they were allowed to switch off and not. Making it really visible, so sharing kind of little case studies, putting pictures on the walls of other people doing the actions so they could see it was normal to do it. And also going around and thanking them and recognising them when they've done them. So we would go back in and say thank you and well done, and keep going as they were changing their behaviours, and that really helped to motivate them as well. So that's a practical example, but the kind of theory behind this, so one of the key behaviour change theories is this. It's called the theory of planned behaviour. And it looks a bit complicated, and I will try and explain it. But essentially, and you might have heard of this, it's quite a famous model of behaviour change. So essentially, the idea is looking at the things that are behind our kind of intentions to take action, and then that's what influences the way that we behave. And the kind of simplest version of this model talks about 3 different aspects that influence our intention to do something or not. So firstly is our attitudes. So essentially, is it important enough? Is it something I want to do? Do I think it's worthwhile? If I don't, I'm unlikely to do it if I just don't see the benefit of it. Secondly, these things called subjective norms. So is it normal to do it? Do other people do it? Will others approve if I do it? Will I look weird? Will I be, the odd person if I'm doing this? If I go, if I stop eating meat and all my friends are still having barbecues with, sausages and burgers, am I going to look like the weirdo and not fit in with my friends? So and then it's more difficult to take those behaviours when we don't feel that they're normal. And then thirdly is what's called perceived behavioural control. So do I have the power to do it even if I wanted to? And it's a perceived behavioural control, because sometimes we think we don't have control over something even when we actually do. So for example, the nurses I just talked about, they thought they didn't have the control to be able to, adjust their heating. They did, they just didn't know, they just didn't perceive that they did. So once we kind of changed that perception, they were able to do things differently. And sometimes they're genuine barriers. I don't know. So for example, something like, I'd like to switch to an electric car, but I can't afford to because they're really expensive. So those just genuine kind of, I don't have control over the situation. Even if I want to do it, even if I think other people are doing it, I just can't do it because there's something getting in the way. So these are the kind of three main things that kind of motivate us or can get in the way of us taking actions and changing our behaviour. So just to give you a couple of examples for each of these. So firstly, an example of a behaviour change campaign around attitudes was, back in the 1970s, it wasn't really that normal to wear car seat belts. People just didn't see it as important as we do today. And so the advertising campaigns were really strongly around showing the dangers of driving without a seatbelt. So you might remember there was an advert that said, like most victims, Julie knew her killer, it was her son, tapping into making sure that we really understood as the public, this was really important. It was an important action to take. So it was really trying to shift our attitudes. And of course, attitudes have really changed around this. Same with drink driving. Our attitudes of seeing it as just something that of course we must do, and it is important to do. Secondly, so an example of kind of social norms is, you may have, again, this is quite a famous example, you may have heard it before, is a hotel towels. So I'm sure if any of you stayed in a hotel, you normally get the little sign on the wall that says, help us save the planet by reusing your towels. And if you want it washed, leave it in the bath or the floor or whatever. So what they found, so there was an experiment done where they tested 3 different types of messaging to try and encourage people to reuse their towels more and stop them being washed every time they were used. So the first messaging was around kind of environmental protection. So it's that, please help us save the planet by reusing your towels. And they found that around 35% of people would reuse their towels with this type of messaging. The second one added in a bit of social norming. So it added in a bit of, most other guests at this hotel, most other guests do reuse their towels, still please help us save the planet, but making it feel like it was a normal thing to do. And they found that increased by about 10%, about 10% more people would reuse their towels as it felt more normal to do so. And then finally, they tried another type of messaging, which was even more specific. So most guests who stayed in this room reused their towels. So people were seeing it was not just normal for other people, but other people like me, because they must be like me, because they stayed in this room just like I am. And it increased even higher to 49%. So helping people see that things are normal, and not just normal for other people, but for people like themselves, is a really, really strong way of influencing people's behaviour. And then finally, an example of what I was talking about, that kind of perceived control. So this was a campaign that was aiming, the action they wanted to improve was that it was with an organisation where there was really low numbers of staff cycling to work. So did some focus groups and asked, well, what are the barriers, what's getting in the way? And they found that staff were just a bit scared. Road fear was putting them off the idea of cycling to work. So they liked the idea of it. They were like, I'd be happy to do it. I know it's important. I'd like to do it, but I'm scared of doing it because I'm scared for my safety, which is totally understandable. So by knowing this, then the solution that was put in place to overcome it was putting a buddy map together of other people in the organisations, showing where they were cycling from, so that people could meet up and cycle in together, so they didn't feel like they were having to do it on their own in a scary way, but coming together and being supported by other people who already did those cycle routes and could support them and help them, and they could cycle in together. So I was going to give you, if we've got time, just there is a little bit more to go through, but I was going to do just a quick activity for everyone. Of just think about a sustainable behaviour that you do, and what helps you do it, what motivates you, and thinking around this kind of attitudes. Is it that you think it's important? Is it, you know, norms? Does it feel normal to do it? Is it to do with, you know, it's within your control to do it? And then think of a sustainable behaviour that you don't do. There's always something that all of us don't do. None of us are perfect. And think about what is it that stops you? Is it it's just not important enough? Or is it that no one else is doing it, so it doesn't, you know, it feels a bit odd? Or is it that, you know, that you just don't feel like you have that control over it, of being able to do it? It's too hard in some way. So I'm just going to give you a couple of minutes just to think about that. Okay, I hope everyone's had the chance to at least just think of something. So we won't have time for everyone to share, but would anyone like to go ahead and share either something they do or something they don't do, and what they think influences their behaviour? Yes, Keith.
If I may, I really struggled, to be honest, to think of something, but then it struck me, I don't like holiday flying. I don't like flying off on holidays. And why don't I like it? Because of cost to me, because of the sheer discomfort of flying long haul. I find it uncomfortable. It's just, the whole flying experience is miserable, airports and planes, and it's just not convenient. So that's a sustainable behavior that I do, and those are the reasons that those are the things that help me do that.
Thank you, Keith. And I know lots of people who are on the other end of the spectrum who would love to be able to give up flying, but who love their holidays so much they would find it very difficult. So it is, and that's where it's really interesting. What are our own personal motivators, which can be very different. Thank you for sharing that, Keith. That's a great example. Anyone else like to share?
When I was trying to think of something that I don't do, that has been on my mind quite a bit, is switching banks to a better bank, a more eco-friendly bank, and trying to think of the reasons. One was just being a bit lazy and not finding the time, or like perceived difficulty in doing so. I have no idea if it's difficult or not, because I've not actually looked into it, because reason one, that I'm lazy, and then also like some strange feeling of brand loyalty, because I've been with the same bank, but actually that probably doesn't mean anything. So yeah, those I guess were the reasons I came up with why I haven't switched yet.
Thank you. It's a really great example, and again, it shows that there can often be multiple things that get in the way, and it's not necessarily being lazy. It's just there's many. We are busy. We're all busy people, and there's always a million things to do on our to-do lists, and it's getting around to prioritizing it, because it's there's always so many other things to do. So don't beat yourself up for being lazy. It's just there's always lots to do in life. Thank you, Mandy.
Yeah, I just thought something that I don't do very often. In my house, it's quite difficult. I try and always turn off my lights when I leave a room, but my husband continuously keeps the lights on. So there's a battle between me and my husband about the lights on and turning the lights off. He doesn't bother turning the lights off because he doesn't pay the actual bill. I pay the actual bill, so I try and always turn the lights off. So that's something that I do struggle with at home.
Thanks, Mandy. Yeah, the motivator there for you. You need to find a way of motivating your husband. What would make it important enough for him? Thank you. Anyone else like to share? Go for it.
I get my milk delivered now in glass bottles with the foil lids. The motivation for that is that it's reusable, and for the glass, and the aluminium lid is recyclable. So that's an example.
Thank you. So for you, the motivator is because it's the right thing to do, which is a really strong motivator. And knowing that it's the right thing to do is something that can tip us over into doing it. It's just strongly believing that I don't want to create waste, and I want to use milk bottles that are recyclable. Thank you very much. Let's take one more before we move on. I think Steve, you had your hand up.
The first one of sustainable behaviour that I do, which is, I'm sure everyone else does, which is recycling. So recycling plastics and vegetable waste, etc. You sort of do that because it's sort of the norm. Everyone does it, and it's made easy for you. But one thing that I probably wish I could do but don't do is drive an electric car. And I don't do that because it's quite expensive, but also not entirely sure that the technology is where it ought to be. And I probably buy a car and it'll be out of date within months. So yeah, so that's my two ideas.
Thank you very much, Steve. Yeah, and we're about to go on to talk about that in terms of making it easy. Yeah, I think the electric car thing is, a lot of people are still put off by thinking, well, the technology is moving so fast, and they'll become cheaper soon, and there'll be more charging points soon. So yeah, I think that's a common one. Thank you very much, Steve. Yes, Paul.
Quick one. A very quick one. I'd love to be vegetarian, but bacon.
I feel exactly where you're coming from. I have managed to be vegetarian. It took me years of trying and failing and trying and failing. For me, it was chicken. But I have to say, when I smell a bacon sandwich, I do, I could be very tempted.
Perhaps if I might just say, you could give yourself permission to eat bacon. I'm a vegetarian, however, I do eat bacon, and then you can have that exception, can't you? And vegetarian for the rest of it.
I think that's a really lovely way to look at it, Keith. And I think that is, I think for a lot of us, we kind of think, oh, well, if I'm going to find it hard in that one way, I'll just not do any of it. Whereas actually reducing, actually even the climate scientists are showing we don't need to all be completely vegan and vegetarian. But if all of us reduced our meat intake, then that would make a huge difference. So for those of you that find it very, very hard, yeah, reducing the amount of meat you eat and having that occasional bacon sandwich or an amazing steak or whatever it is that you want is still a great step in the right direction. So yeah, making it work for you is a really good thing to do. Thank you very much. Right, we'll move on in the interest of time. Thank you for sharing all those examples. Right, so next theory that I want to talk about that I think you've probably all heard of. So that kind of sits alongside theory of planned behaviour, but is called nudge theory, which I'm sure you've heard of. Which people have written, huge books on this, so I'm not going to try and cover it all, but just kind of some of the key principles. So some of the key principles of nudge theory are essentially like that we can be nudged to make the right choices without it being too difficult for us, so making it easy. So just removing those barriers, whether that's giving people knowledge and making it the simplest choice for people when there's multiple options. How do we make it the simplest choice for them? Making it attractive, so thinking about how you can make something people actually want to do, whether that's because it's important or thinking of ways that actually it might be more fun to do. And I'm going to show you some examples of these in a second. And then finally, like making it expected. So this is again taps into that social norming side of things. So just sharing stories, particularly of people in your own areas, is really, really powerful. Of other people doing the behaviour, making it feel like it's just the normal thing to do, that everybody else is doing it. So I'm going to just talk you through a few examples. So nudge is often used in a not the healthiest way in sales, for example, in supermarkets, when they put those chocolate bars next to the till, it just makes them all that more easier to just pick one up and buy it because it's right next to the till, which making it as easy as possible for us to make that decision to buy that product. So that's where it's used in a slightly negative way, but it's a very effective strategy, which is why they use it. But it has been used in super positive ways as well. So, for example, making it easy has been used in organ donation. So in countries where organ donation is opt-in, where you have to kind of tick to say, yes, please, I would like to leave my organs to be used after I die, then they tend to have around 30% of people signing up. But when in countries where it's opt-out, where you're just automatically opted in and you have to specifically tick to say, I don't want to have my organs donated after I die, it's much, much higher. They have rates of around 85 to 90%. So, and that is, it's an example of just making it the easy thing to do and making it so people don't have to do anything. They don't have to tick. But if you're making them tick to say I want to do it, I want to opt in, it's just that tiny little barrier to get over that makes less people do it. Making it fun. So this is an example from the environmental charity Hubbub, who are doing a kind of litter campaign on cigarette litter. And when we were originally meant to do this presentation, it was actually the day of one of the England matches, so it was very appropriate. But now obviously we know football has not come home, unfortunately. But they created this box of kind of so people to put their cigarettes in so they could vote, is football coming home? No chance. Or yes, it's our year. So encouraging people to, it's not an exciting thing throwing your litter in the right bin, throwing your cigarette in the right bin, but making it fun encourages people to do it. And then finally, making it expected. So here's an example of tax payments. So this was an experiment done in the UK. So tax letters were sent out to people saying 9 out of 10 people in your area are up to date with their taxes. So again, that social norming thing, making it feel like it's expected and everyone else is doing it. Tax payments increased by 50% compared to not putting that messaging in. So again, the power of just feeling like, oh, if everyone else is doing it, then I better do it too. And that was found to be as well when we had our kind of big lockdowns last year and earlier this year for COVID, and we were actually pretty compliant. Most people were pretty compliant and went along with the with the rules. And they looked into the reasons why, as a study done. They found it was because we just thought everyone else was doing it, so I better do it too. So it can be really important to make sure those messages are getting out of just how normal it is to do the right thing, rather than those stories of the few people who aren't doing the right thing. That can make it feel like, oh, well, other people aren't doing it, so why should I bother? So things like in the news at the moment, loads of things about, you know, people deleting the COVID app, which then just makes it feel like, well, if everyone else is deleting it, I'll delete it too. So messaging can be really, really important of making it feel like everyone else is doing the right thing. So I just want to wrap up finally with just like the kind of key points of, like, if you want to design a campaign locally to change behaviour, just a reminder, be super specific about what it is you want to change. What is the behaviour? Who is it that you want to do things differently? How will you know when this has happened? How can you measure it before and after? Go and talk to your target audience, find out from them what are the things that are stopping them or that encourage them to do those behaviours. So then kind of design your materials of how you're going to encourage them through that knowledge. And how will you feedback? How will you tell people they're doing the right thing and recognise and reward them for doing the right thing? Yeah, and that's it. So thank you very much for having me, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Natasha. Yeah, any questions?
Yes, Alana.
I had one just about the example with the project with the nurses that you talked about early on. I was just curious what the outcomes of the project were. Like, was it effective? Did anything happen that was unexpected, or did it all go to plan? I mean, it sounded like a really interesting project.
Yeah, I mean, we did that across numerous hospitals around the UK. Yes, it was effective. We did, you know, I can't remember the exact numbers. It was a few years ago since we did it, but certainly, you know, we would do kind of audits of how many lights were on and what temperature the heaters were at and things. And certainly after the campaigns we've done them, we certainly saw changes in those behaviours, and we saw reductions in energy use. Usually it was the kind of estates departments that had brought us in to do this because they wanted to save money, so their motivation was very much saving money. So we'd report to them, and, you know, we saved, I think it was around 120,000 we saved Arts Health across their various, they've got about 4 or 5 hospitals in London, and by doing this they saved a huge amount of money. But obviously, you know, that wasn't the messaging we used for the nurses because it wasn't what motivated them, but that's what motivated the hospitals to bring us in to do it. And just as I suppose, whatever you're doing, the ones that were successful were the ones where you get buy-in right from the start, where you're like, you know, the people that you need are on board with how important it is to do it. So where you got buy-in from, so in that example, it was with hospitals where you got buy-in from the management that they want to make this happen, it will happen. If you don't have that buy-in and they're kind of just doing it and leaving you alone to do it and not really supporting you, it's really hard. So yeah. Paul, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I've got a question about deciding what to do. So there's all sorts of things you could do.
Yeah.
Some might require a huge amount of effort and not get actually much, you know, there might not be much benefit from them, and others maybe you can be more effective in that you might not have to put so much effort in, but it can have a really big impact. How do you decide on projects to do? Is there a process?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it really depends on I suppose it's maybe I guess it's thinking about locally. There's the two things, you know, that we talked about. So it's what is gonna have the biggest impact. What's a problem locally? What are people not doing that you actually would like them to do? Because if there's something that you think lots of people should be doing and actually they already are, it's not worth doing. And if there's something that people are not doing, and how we used to start was this essentially just write down absolutely everything that you could do. Just brainstorm like hundreds of ideas, and don't worry too much at that stage about what it is you're going to do in the end. And then slowly go through, and what we would do is almost kind of plot them on a graph of kind of impact, like how much impact they're going to have and how likely do we think we can make this happen, how likely do we think, and kind of put them, and even with kind of sticky notes, just kind of stick in the different behaviours and then choose the ones that are kind of the most going to have the biggest impact, and you think you can have the most likely impact in influencing people to do as well. So yeah, I can't tell you what to choose. That would just really depend on what you think is locally important or not being done. But yeah, I would just say start from coming up with as many ideas as possible, and then whittle them down. Get a group of you to kind of whittle them down together, and even talk to people and say which ones do they think would be the best ones to choose, and make a decision as a group.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Paul. Beth.
I've not really fully formed this question in my head, so it might not make sense, but hopefully it does. Similar to Paul's question, how do you decide on who your target group is? So it was interesting you saying about your target group was the nurses in that scenario, but you also needed buy-in from the management for it to be effective. Like if, say for example, you were running a campaign to promote usable coffee cups like in your community, like how would you decide whether your target group is the general population and them, the onus being on them bringing their coffee cup to local businesses, or if it's on local businesses like promoting like reusable coffee cups in their cafes sort of thing? How is there a way that you sort of take a problem and then decide who your target audience should be in that? I don't know if that made any sense.
I suppose if in that example, what I'll probably start by doing is talking to the cafes. They will know who their customer base is, and kind of working with them to try and get their buy-in, because any scheme is, they're probably like the kind of management side of things that you need to get their buy-in if you want to kind of come up with a scheme that's going to promote like local reusable coffee cup use. You kind of need to get the cafes on board. So finding out from them like who are what's their demographic of customers, and starting from there, I would say, and finding out from them, they've probably already done things. So what have they done? And if you want to come at it from them saying we want to help, we want to come in and support, to encourage this, and we want to do it on a level where it's not just each individual cafe doing it themselves, but bringing the community together to tackle this problem, and then just starting by chatting to the local cafe management teams, and finding out from them what's worked for them, what hasn't worked for them, and seeing if you can talk to some of their customers and get some ideas of what, even if it's getting permission to kind of hang outside their shops and just doing some quick kind of polling and surveys with people coming out if they're not using a reusable cup, of just finding out what might encourage them to do so, could be a nice thing to do. So yeah, I think it just always starts with people and just finding out, there will be some local knowledge out there, and so kind of tapping into that wherever you can in whatever it is that you're looking to change.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Is there one last question from anyone before we let
Alana?
If no one else has a question, I do have one final question that's sort of related to some of the other questions that have been asked, which was just, you mentioned about just brainstorming, getting a whole bunch of ideas and then sort of, plotting them on sort of impact versus how likely people are to kind of carry out those behaviours. And you were sort of, you're talking to Beth about sort of, asking people, why they're not using a coffee cup. When you say, when you're deciding how likely people are to undertake an action, how are you making that decision? Is it kind of a process where you start with a kind of spot where you kind of know, and then you maybe go out and ask people? And you talked earlier about focus groups. Like, what's deciding what people are likely to do?
I think it depends on the behaviour. Some things I think is just really obvious to know that like it's going to be really more difficult for people to do, and some things yeah, it does involve talking to people to find out, and it's always worth talking to people to find out, because you know sometimes your assumptions are wrong, and it's really interesting to find out. You know, we wouldn't have known that. You know, we might have thought, oh, nurses aren't really going to be that motivated by the environment. They'll be more motivated by saving their money, their health trust money, and actually it wasn't that important to them. So I think, you know, you often don't always know, but you can normally make a bit of a guess. So you can start from somewhere. You can make a bit of a guess of like, you know, how difficult. I suppose things like, I don't know, if you're trying to encourage people to change their heating systems, we know, you can guess that's going to be quite hard for people, because it can be quite difficult to understand, well, what, you know, what sort of heating system can I use as a ground source heat pump. People just don't, it's not really in the public domain to make those decisions easy. It's expensive, it's difficult, it's hard to find out the information. So you can make a kind of educated guess on like, that might be quite difficult to do. And it doesn't mean don't do it. It's just that then it just depends on kind of what effort and resources have you got to put into it. Or something like switching to a reusable coffee cup, I think, you know, you could pretty much so it's a pretty easy thing to do. It will usually save people money in the long run, because it just, you know, you spend your £6 on your cup or whatever, but you save 25p normally every time you buy coffee. And you know, so I think that but then that's why you need to think about the impact as well, because obviously people changing their heating systems is going to have a much bigger environmental impact than people switching their coffee cups. But it depends on, you know, well, and it might be that when you're doing your first, like if you want to start somewhere and do something for the first time, that you've kind of done something like this, then maybe you want to go for something that's a little bit on the easier side of things, and working out, well, what do you actually have the power to influence as well. So, you know, I would imagine it would be quite hard for many of us to think about influencing, you know, choice of heating systems. That's quite is something we really do need, you know, the government to roll out a big scheme to do across the country. So it's also being really clear about, well, what do we think we actually have control to change? So making decisions on those kind of basis. So yeah, I hope these are kind of answering your questions. It's such a big topic, and there's so many different ways you can go with it that, you know, I can't be more specific than that. But I think just always thinking about what is that end state behaviour? What is that really clear behaviour? Is it worth doing? Is it worth the effort? Is this really going to have the impact, you know, that we want it to? How much can we as a group, or whoever it is you're working with, influence this behaviour? How likely is it going to happen? Are we going to be able to make it happen? And then just choosing something and going out and talking to people.